All right, in this part 4 video, we are going to look at some commonly confused terms, methods, and direct instruction and stuff. I'm going to give you some word identification strategies and some things that you can use as always, but let's take a look first at some commonly confused terms. So, questions to think about. What's the difference between word recognition and word identification? Between a strategy and a skill? A method and a strategy, word recognition and decoding. Is direct instruction a method or a strategy? What is large unit phonics? So let's get down to it. Commonly confused terms. Word recognition is a skill. You see a word in print and you instantly and automatically know what it is. You use no or very few letter clues or context or syntactic clues. This word is in the dictionary in your head. You see it and you know exactly what it is. That is word recognition. It's a skill you develop. Automaticity, so you do it automatically. Word identification is a strategy. It's something you consciously employ. You see a word in print, you don't recognize it. It's in the dictionary in your head. So you have to consciously employ some strategy to identify what that word is. A skill is something that you do that automatically. A strategy is a process you consciously employ. Decoding is using the code to identify words. You break it down using phonics or synthetic phonics, and it is one form, decoding or using phonics, one form of word identification, one word identification strategy, one of four, and I'm going to show you all four. As I said, a skill is a process or activity you do automatically without thinking about it, whether it's golfing or wrestling or reading. You don't want to think about it if you want to perform at your optimal levels. We want students to be able to recognize most words automatically and use as few letter and context and syntactic clues as possible. And as I said, the fifth one is a strategy. It's a process you must consciously employ. I don't recognize this word. I need to employ some strategy. Now, we teach the process to develop the skill. We teach the process of identifying words, and we teach the process of comprehension strategies. We teach the process so students don't have to think about it, so they automatically use context or letter clues as they are reading. We teach the process to develop the skill, whether it's a writing process or a word identification process. We want students to be able to do it automatically. All right, moving on. Method, strategy, direct instruction, and systematic phonics. All right, a method is a specified process or defined set of techniques that are used in a prescribed fashion for instruction in a particular subject, such as reading methods or math methods. This is how you do it. This is the approach. These are the steps. That's what a method is. This is the way you go about it. It's more global. A strategy or pedagogical strategy is a technique or a specific tactic that's used in a variety of ways. It's a strategy. You consciously employ it. Literacy pedagogical strategies would include using MAID or language experience approach, MAIS, or repeated reading or sentence combining. These are individual strategies. Pedagogical strategies. Cooperative learning is a pedagogical strategy. It's not an approach. It's not a method. It is a pedagogical strategy. And like all pedagogical strategies in my book, you want to adopt and adapt the ones that work for you. All pedagogical strategies They do not work as opened from the box. You can't just open the box and employ them without thinking. You can't just read the directions. You have to adopt and adapt them to your students and your way of teaching. Pedagogical strategy, that's important. Direct instruction is a strategy. It should not be considered a method or an approach. Now, some people use it as such. That's all they do in reading class. That is wrong. Now, everyone believes in direct instruction. Everyone believes direct instruction is necessary as a strategy, but not a method or an approach. Direct instruction is essential for low-level skills, but if low-level skills is all you teach, low-level learning is all that occurs. And we don't want to impede anyone's progress by giving them just a diet of mind-numbing direct instruction strategies. It's not the what of direct instruction that's at issue here. It's the how and the how much and for what purpose direct instruction. Now, direct instruction contains the elements of essential skills instruction, a clearly defined purpose. This is the purpose. I'm teaching that skill. Explicit instruction with demonstration or modeling. Watch how I do it. Guided practice. You do one or two together with scaffolding. And then independent practice. That is a review or practice of what has already been taught. And if you're doing independent practice correctly, students should be able to succeed with 95 to 100% success. It's practice of what has already been learned here. So you teach, 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 demonstrate, guided practice, do a few together, and then practice. And with any skill, you do not master it in one setting. Every skill you need to revisit and review at successively higher levels. Systematic phonics. There's some system in place to keep track of what skills you taught, when, and how you're going to document. That's systematic phonics instruction. It does not mean that you have to start at one end of a scope and sequence chart and march through a series of skills in a predetermined order. That's not what systematic phonics is. That would be silly, because that is not how human beings learn. That's part to whole instruction, a Humpty Dumpty approach, where you break the act of reading all in a bunch of little parts, and those are the little parts on the scope and sequence chart. And the idea is that if children would just put all the little parts together again, Humpty Dumpty, then they'd be able to read. And that just is not how human beings work. We learn best from whole to part. Seeing the whole puzzle, then we know where the pieces go together. Getting children immersed in the act of reading and teaching the skills as you see they need it. Human beings are not standardized products. Struggling readers are not the same. Some need this skill, some need that skill. How do you know what skills to teach? I'll show you some basic stuff, but essentially your students become the scope and sequence chart. You're looking at your students, you're listening to them read, you're seeing what kind of miscues they make. That's how you know what to teach. That's how you know what to teach. Here's a common scope and sequence chart. And again, it's thought by some, this is part to whole. You go through this list in this order, and when you get to the end, then students will be reading. That's just not how human beings learn things, how our brain operates. Keep it simple. Here are some things that you need to kind of learn. It gives you a sense of what you should be teaching in kindergarten and first grade. They should leave kindergarten knowing their letter sounds and 25 to 40 sight words. That's about it. Consonant blends you get to in first grade. The idea that you're going to start earlier and they're going to be further along later down the line is not borne out by research. And I'm off on a tangent here, but there's a reason why kindergarten is not first grade, why you don't do first grade stuff in kindergarten. It's because kindergarten is not first grade. It is not developmentally appropriate to do first grade things in kindergarten. We call that the push down curriculum. I'm going to push the first grade curriculum down into the kindergarten and students are going to be better prepared. No, they're not developmentally ready. Developmentally appropriate practice. Yes, you can teach all this stuff in a kindergarten level, but in developmentally appropriate ways. For example, if I'm reading Danny the Duck, it could be D-Day, and I would teach the letter sounds very incidentally in the context of authentic reading and writing activities. That's systematic phonics, and I would keep track of what skills I taught and when students have mastered it. Something like this. Whole group, I would just keep track of what skills were taught, and I'd have an individual one for students when I notice students have mastered that skill. This tells me a heck of a lot more than a stinking standardized test. Simple, simple, simple. The same with sight words. You'd keep track of when you taught them and when students have mastered them. That is systematic phonics, a system in place for teaching, a general idea for keeping track of when you have taught the skills and when you have mastered them. And I'm going to use an analogy. Can I? I used to be a wrestling coach, and there were certain skills that I knew my wrestlers needed to know. And I would start out teaching them, but I did not assume mastery. We had to visit them time and time again. In the same way I would keep track of when I taught the skill, we'd have to revisit it at higher and higher levels. So teaching reading is a lot like teaching wrestling. However, just like wrestling and reading, you don't learn how to wrestle by mastering a series of skills and drills. You need to be engaged in the authentic act of wrestling and learn skills within that context. You need to be engaged in authentic acts of reading and learn skills within that context. That's the point I was getting to. All right, some approaches to phonics instruction. Well, there's kind of three. The first is synthetic phonics, and that's the traditional way of teaching phonics. We teach isolated sounds. You convert the letters to sounds and the sounds to words, and you put them together. Synthesis, synthetic material. All right, that is a traditional way that most people think of phonics. The second one is analytic phonics. Children analyze words that they know. And in the language experience activity or approach, I described how you do this. You write words and then they find the words in the beginning, middle, or end. They're analyzing, and you're teaching phonics in the context of authentic writing, stories, or books. And the third approach is less known. It's called large unit phonics. You're teaching students to look at patterns or phonograms or prefixes, suffixes, patterns versus individual letters. And I'll give you some ideas for that in a minute. But which approach should you use? You should use all three approaches, not one or the other, but all three, because some students may learn better with one of these. No student is the same. So use all three. Of course, of the three, I think large unit is the most effective because the human brain is designed to recognize patterns, letter patterns. All right, to use for large unit phonics, I used the 30 most common phonograms, and here they are in order of the most common to the least. And I would teach students to recognize these letter patterns within words. I'll show you some example, but let's go back to word identification strategies. Direct instruction. Here's where direct instruction is used to specifically teach these 4 word identification strategies. Now remember, word identification strategy, you see a word, you don't know what it is, you need to use some strategy that you consciously employ to try to recognize that word. And the first word identification strategy is context clues. Boys and girls, when I don't know what a word is, I have to use context clues. I look at both sides of the words. I read the sentence and say blank. I make a guess, and then I reread to see if that guess makes sense. Use steps something like this: adopt and adapt. I would teach using direct instruction like I just did. I would model it in front of students, and then we do some guided practice activities, and then they would practice by themselves. That is one. This is probably the most efficient and effective I have found. Word parts or analogy. This is based on large unit phonics, where you get students looking for parts of the word that they recognize. Look for the phonograms or letter patterns. Boys and girls, when I see a word I don't recognize, I need to use a strategy. I look for familiar word parts. Oh, there's one. I use those parts and context to make a guess. Then I reread it to see if that guess makes sense. Watch me as I do one for you. All right? Word parts, analogy, word analysis. I call it word parts when I'm working with students. Analogy, analysis, that you want things to be as simple as possible. Morphemic analysis, I use the word prefix suffix. Now this is something like word parts, except you're looking for familiar prefixes, suffixes, or roots. And they use this to make a guess, and then they reread to see if the guess makes sense. That's the third one. The fourth one is phonics, and I teach the strategies. Boys and girls, when I see a word I don't recognize, I look at the letters, put the letters together, make a guess based on the letter, and reread to see if the guess makes sense. This one, reread. That's how you develop metacognition, thinking about thinking. That's a mature reading behavior. Does this make sense? All right, let's look at 3 phonics strategies. And word building, I use this based on the 30 most common phonograms. Students build words using phonograms or word parts, and gets them noticing letter patterns. Remember, the human brain is a pattern recognition device. That's how it makes sense of the world around them. A lot of ways you can do this. Given the phonogram or word family, students add the letter m, add m, ap. And then if you're using a PowerPoint or whatever, show the complete words here or write the complete words, however you want to do it. Some teachers have Scrabble letters and do things like that, so you're moving things around. This can be done in small group. You can say, boys and girls, I am very angry. Find the phonogram that shows you're angry. And maybe working in pairs, they could put, there you go. Play riddles and games. Use your teacher creativity and intelligence. Word family, given different letters. Ba, at, k, at, h, at, m, at. Boys and girls, I want to put something on my head. Find the letter. However you want to do this. These should be briskly paced activities. I would say 10 minutes to 15 at the most. Keep it fun. When I'm online, and here's with older students, again, we're looking at word families. N, ap, in. Put it together, yes. Older students again, 3rd, 4th grade, who are struggling with word identification, word recognition. Ba, ak, t. And they're recognizing letter patterns. That's the goal here. And I would do this quickly. And I'm reinforcing the short A at the same time. Oh, this is a good one. It's kind of like Wheel of Fortune, called mystery word, but there's no wheel and there's no fortune. You have a target word that has a phonogram, prefix, or suffix that you're focusing on, and you include that target with the letters. I'm focusing on the AY phonogram or word family. And they guess. This is a fun game. They can use pairs or small groups, and they would come up eventually with the word payment. I'm reinforcing. They could also do the MENT word family. Meant, that is often a suffix. Okay. You're limited only by your imagination here. Mystery word. And this is an interesting one. Shared reading for large unit phonics. Mustafa, this was a great one. It's a word sorting activity, and word sorts of any kind are great for students to recognize patterns within words. It's that inductive analysis, which is so powerful. Rather than showing or telling, students get to discover similar patterns within words. This can be done with early readers, I would say kindergarten, first grade, second grade. It can be done with higher up as well, and you can focus not only on letter patterns, but on meaning. Here's how you do it. With younger students, you do a shared reading where you read the book to students. Then you read the book with students using scaffolded oral reading. And then students read the book independently or with a buddy. Now, with older students, of course, we would skip right to 3. Students who are reading at the second grade level, for example. Students would identify interesting or important words, and depending on the number of students, I would say they would select what they think are 3 to 5 interesting or important words. The number is, you want, depending on the group, you want 10 to 20 words that students can sort. So if you have 5 students, well, maybe each would select 3 words or 4 words or 5 words, you decide. But students identify what they think are interesting and important. The next day, the teacher writes their words on 3x5 cards that they found interesting or important. And then they create groups based on their cards. They put them in letter groups. Now, for older students, I simply create the list and let them write it down. But younger students, they need to manipulate. So they can create a lot of different patterns, categories for letter patterns. They can also create groups based on meaning. And that's how you begin to develop vocabulary and word knowledge. So yes, they create groups based on letter patterns, but they also create groups based on meaning. And here's what you can do. And if you're using a Basel, you can use this as well. Save these words, put them in an envelope. Next year, when you read the same book, you've got your cards and you can go ahead and do it. Very powerful activity. Of course, you can use these words for spelling or writing prompts or other such things. We want to get them using the words. All right, word recognition, automatically, word identification, a strategy. You know the word, but you have to employ a strategy. Strategy, consciously employed, skill, automatic. A method, it's a general approach for going about things. A strategy is a specific technique for doing a specific thing. Word recognition, you do it automatically. Decoding is using phonics, breaking it into letters. Direct instruction is a strategy or should be a strategy. Large unit phonics is looking at letter patterns using word families and letter patterns to teach word parts. All right, that is the end. The next one will be on diagnosing reading difficulties.